All right, just when we're ready to take the masks off, a new variant is taking off. We don't know how dangerous it is. We do know it's led to a dramatic spike in cases in China, in Europe, particularly Italy, and now here, even in the Big Apple in New York City. It's called BA2. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the White House chief medical advisor, here now to explain if this is a big deal and we have to worry. Doctor, good to see you again.
Thank you, Neil. Good to see you. Glad to see you back in full action again.
No, thank you for that. Let me ask you, Doctor, about this BA2. Should we worry about it?
Well, look at its characteristics, and we could make that determination. It's got a transmission advantage over BA1, which is the classic original Omicron. Not a multifold advantage, but a percentage advantage, which means that over time, it likely will be the dominant variant. Worldwide, Neil, it's already about 91% of all the recognizable isolates. And in the United States, it's creeping up 30, 40, in some parts of the country, 50% or more. It does not appear to be any more serious when it comes to complications like the need for hospitalization and advanced disease. And it doesn't appear that it escapes immune protection any more or less than the original Omicron. So the only distinguishing feature is that it's more transmissible, which is accounting for the spikes that we're seeing throughout the world, including in the European Union and the UK.
So now we've been in the process of demasking everywhere. There's a push even on the part of airline executives to ask the government to end this requirement that you have to wear masks on planes or in airports. What do you think of all that? Are we doing it too soon, about right, no need for panic? How would you describe it?
Well, certainly I don't think there's a need to panic, Neil. The idea about too soon or not is really a judgment call. We know that when you pull back, the three factors that causing the spikes that we're seeing in the European Union and worldwide are, as I mentioned a moment ago, the increased transmissibility advantage of this isolate, the BA2, the pulling back on some of the restrictions, particularly masking in indoor settings, and a general waning of immunity from people who've been vaccinated as well as people who've gotten infected. You've got to have a balance. We all want to return to a degree of normality. One of the things that's encouraging, certainly in the UK, and if we do get an increase here, it likely will mimic what we see in the UK, is that although the infections are going up, there doesn't appear, at least in the UK data, to be an increase in hospitalizations with severe disease, certainly not an increase requirement or usage of intensive care beds, and the all-cause mortality has not increased. So it may be that an expected increase in cases when you pull back on some of the restrictions, particularly masking in an indoor setting. So that's really not surprising, Neil. The question is, will it have a major impact on severity of disease, which would be a problem, and then we'd have to reconsider what we want to do in response to that.
As a New Yorker yourself, Doctor, as you're aware, Mayor Eric Adams in New York City has been getting a collective Bronx cheer for what some people say is a double standard on vaccinations, lifting them for athletes and some entertainers, but not for everybody else. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, Neil, that's obviously a delicate situation in New York. I really don't want to be out there outguessing the mayor, who I'm sure is trying to do what's best for the city, but he made that decision to pull back on the requirement for vaccination for certain entertainers and sports figures in some of the athletic teams. I mean, as you mentioned, there is a pushback on that might be unfair to others. But, you know, I'm not there on the ground in New York. I don't have a good feel for what the situation is. So it really is a tough problem. So I'd rather
but
not
just,
really
why couldn't it be
comment
for everybody, Doctor? I guess I'm saying if you're going to not require vaccinations for athletes and entertainers, do the same for everybody else? Or if you are, include the athletes and the entertainers, be consistent.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, again, Neil, I don't want to be taking sides on that. I think that the mayor had a difficult decision to make, as you mentioned when you introduced the topic. There's been a lot of pushback on that because some are seeing it as unfair. You can understand that, but you also have to look at the mayor's side. Again, it's a tough call. It's really a tough call.
Yeah, I guess he wants those for home games to be able to play fair. But really, if we're doing something that helps the New York Mets, is that really a good idea? But leaving that aside, Doctor, leaving that aside, when it comes to where we stand in this battle, last time we chatted, you talked about the idea that we might be treating this like we do the flu and a shot every year. But now you have companies like Moderna and Pfizer talking about up to 4 shots if you include a couple of booster shots. I mean, how far does this go? A lot of people are just confused.
Neil, we don't know. We do know that the protection of a vaccination and a boost does wane. A study from the CDC in their Vision Network cohort showed that following a 3rd dose, when you look at around 4 to 5 months following the 3rd dose, the protection against hospitalization wanes from about 91% down to 78%. And the data from Israel are even more dramatic than that. So the question is a reasonable question. Do you want to give a 4th dose at least to some subset of the population, likely the elderly, who generally don't have as robust an immune response as an otherwise healthy young person? The FDA is looking at those data really in real time right now. There's also going to be another aspect to it. It's the immediate question of the waning that we're seeing now. Should we or should we not be making recommendations regarding a 4th shot, at least to some subgroup? But then probably the broader question in the long run is, what about when we get to the late summer and early fall, when there will be a considerable duration of time following the 3rd boost in so many people in the population? Will the immunity wane enough that you really would require for full protection to get that 4th boost? And then the subsequent question is the broader one, is how often would we have to do this? And to be quite honest and candid, Neil, we don't know, because this is just new territory for us with this virus. And we don't know, after you get, for example, a 4th shot, will the durability be such that you don't have to get a shot like we do with the flu every year, or it might actually be required. And I think it would really not be prudent for us to guess, because we don't know. We just have to take a look at the data and follow the cohorts and see if you have enough of a diminution in protection that you do get a serious spike in hospitalizations. Again, particularly among people who are in the elderly group. We know for sure that we absolutely need it for the immune compromised. There's no doubt about that. So that's already settled. But for the rest of the population, it's a bit unclear.
Yeah, you talk about the immune compromised. I'm in that subset of the population. I deal with it. But, it's funny, Doctor, when I returned after being out, I was in the ICU dealing with a pretty serious bacterial infection, and, something that I certainly didn't expect after being fully vaccinated to get COVID twice, and the last time, again, quite severe. Now, I'm not saying that to talk about me, but to talk about others who then questioned, well, if you've been vaccinated, Cavuto, and this happened to you, who's to say that it wasn't the vaccine that did it? Now, of course, I've talked to a lot of doctors. I got to talk to smart people like you who said that, because of that, it could have been a lot worse for me. But again, there's a sort of a dark side coming out, where a lot of people saying the vaccine wasn't and isn't worth it. It's no good. It almost kills people. And I just curious to get your response to that.
Yeah. Well, I think you know what my response is going to be, Neil, and I think you yourself know, you're sophisticated enough that if you had not been vaccinated, Neil, you you and I may not be having this conversation right now. Sadly, I'm so glad that you are here and we're having this conversation. But if you look at the data really are crystal clear and speak for themselves. If you look at the general population and look at hospitalizations and deaths and compare the vaccinated with the unvaccinated, or even more importantly, the vaccinated plus boosted with the unvaccinated, overwhelmingly, the hospitalization and deaths are among the unvaccinated. You and several others in the population are in a different category, Neil, because when you are immune compromised, you really don't have the kind of natural response to a vaccine or even to a prior infection. And that's the reason why you're seeing us strongly recommend the boosters for people who are immune compromised. But the idea that the vaccine is causing harm here, the data overwhelmingly argue against that.
Yeah, I mean, it's indisputable, but, you know, I can bang my head against a brick wall here. There's no politics here in this for me. I just want people to be safe, but I'll leave that aside. You recently had said, I believe, in an interview on ABC with George Stephanopoulos about the issue of retirement came up. You're 81 years young. You weren't looking for that, but I then started thinking about what could happen in the next few months, or if Republicans take control of Congress or the House and or Senate, you would most likely be a target of hearings and them going after you. Are you ready for that? Do you fear that? Do you think that you could handle that? Where are you on this?
Well, first of all, I have absolutely nothing to hide or nothing to be concerned about of anything that I've done. So I never have been, am not now, and will never be afraid of hearings done in good faith in oversight. I mean, obviously, if you looked at some of the hearings, they've started off out of nowhere to be ad hominem attacks without even asking a reasonable question. And you've known that, you've seen that, the clips of that, Neil. That's not in good faith.
Are you referring to more to Rand Paul? You're Senator Rand Paul, who has just said that you were deemed the dictator in chief on these matters.
Yeah, or starting off the conversation by saying, how do you feel about being responsible for the death of 5 million people, which is absolutely preposterous and slanderous. So, but anyway, your question is my decision about career and what I'm doing, about what my role would be, is not at all influenced by any concern about hearings or attacks. I get attacked now and I continue to do my job. I have nothing to hide and certainly nothing to fear.
So if they were to subpoena you, Doctor, if they had control of the Senate and one of these, I mean, would you go?
Well, I always abide by the natural lawful things. I mean, if one gets subpoenaed, one goes in front of the Congress.
But you wouldn't avoid it, in other words, if it came to that.
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking. I mean, I've never avoided anything that had to do with congressional oversight, and I have no intention of avoiding it.
Okay,
but
so
that's
if they
not
were doing, I'm belaboring
a
point, and I don't mean to belabor this, but I just want to be clear that if they were to look into the origins of this virus, hold special hearings on that, and say, Dr. Fauci, we want you down here to talk about this, you would say?
I do it, but Neil, I'm doing that already. So it isn't what I would do, I'm doing that already. I've testified before multiple hearings, and I will continue to do that. So this isn't anything new. And again, that has nothing to do with how long I stay in the government or not. It's completely unrelated.
This whole shift, when you first started, you were an international rock star. You were featured in entertainment magazines. You crossed lines from far from just a top doctor to a cult following. And then the pendulum shifted along with the increase in cases and the second doubts and questions about you. Did you look at that and experience that and say, this has not been worth it?
No, Neil, I think you need to get a perspective from how I look at it. I'm a physician. I'm a scientist. I direct a very important institute, one that has been responsible for the most part for the development of the vaccines that have saved millions of lives already. I don't think about it in terms of being a cult person and everybody idolizing me and being a controversial, polarizing figure where other people, you know, do the kinds of things that we've been talking about attacking me. Either end of that spectrum, to me, is irrelevant, Neil. My job is what's important, and that is, which I've done for now almost 40 years as director of the Institute, making my goal the preservation and the protecting of the health of the American people, and indirectly the health of the rest of the world, because the United States plays such an important role. So the idea when you're idolized or you're demonized, I mean, that's just a reflection of what's going on in society and really has very little to do with what I am and who I am and what I do. So you may not believe it or appreciate it, but all of that other stuff is irrelevant. It's my job and what I do that's important.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.